Learn to be alone. It sounds simple, but for most people it's one of the hardest things they'll ever do. We live in a world that makes you believe that being alone means being broken. That if you're not constantly surrounded by people in a relationship or in the middle of some social circle, you're missing something. You're lacking, you're behind, you're failing. But let me ask you this. If being alone is so wrong, why is it that the most powerful transformations, the deepest growth, and the clearest clarity always come when we're by ourselves? Here's the truth that no one talks about. You have to learn how to be alone, because your healing, your power, your purpose all begin in solitude. That uncomfortable silence you keep avoiding, that's where your soul starts to speak. That empty room you rush to fill with noise, people, distractions, that's where your strength is being born. You can only learn who you are when there's no one else around to influence you. This video isn't about pushing people away. It's about finally coming home to yourself. It's about realizing that your relationship with yourself is the foundation for every other relationship you'll ever have. And if you don't master that, you'll always feel incomplete, no matter how much love or success you attract. Because let's be honest, so many people jump from person to person, friendship to friendship, crowd to crowd, and still feel empty inside. They're constantly searching for someone to complete them, validate them, save them. But the truth is, no one can save you from the parts of yourself you haven't faced yet. And no one should have to fill the voids you refuse to heal. That's why solitude is a gift. It gives you the space to meet your insecurities head on, to sit with your fears, to question your beliefs, to understand your patterns. It's the classroom where self-respect is taught. It's the mirror where truth is revealed. But here's the part no one wants to admit. At first, learning to be alone will feel like grief. It will feel like loss. It will feel like something's missing. But stay with it. Because what feels like emptiness at first is actually space. Space to build, space to grow, space to become. And the version of you that emerges on the other side, version will be rooted, confident, unshakable. That version won't beg for love. That version won't tolerate being treated as an option. That version will attract peace, not chaos. So if you're afraid of being alone, this message is for you. If you're in a season of solitude and you don't understand why, this is your reminder. You're not being punished. You're prepared. Because once you learn to be alone, you'll never again hand your peace to anyone else to protect. The fear of being alone is a lie you were taught. Let's begin with the truth that most people are too afraid to say out loud. The fear of being alone is not natural, it's taught. From the time you were a child, the world conditioned you to believe that solitude equals loneliness, that being alone means you're unwanted, unworthy, or forgotten. Movies, books, society, they all repeat the same message. Find someone, be with someone, never be alone. As if wholeness can only be found in the arms of another. As if being single is a problem that needs to be fixed. As if silence is something to escape. But here's the truth. Learning to be alone is one of the most powerful skills you can ever develop. Because once you no longer fear your own company, you become free. Free from the need to be constantly validated. Free from clinging to toxic relationships. Free from betraying your own soul just to avoid the discomfort of solitude. The fear of being alone was planted in you so you would never meet your true self. Because once you meet her, once you really sit with your own spirit, you awaken something unstoppable. You start to realize you don't need someone to complete you. You are already whole. You don't need constant attention to feel worthy. You already are. The world is full of people who are surrounded by others, yet feel completely lost inside. Why? Because they've never sat with themselves long enough to hear their own voice. They've never looked in the mirror and asked, who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I stop performing? And this is why solitude feels scary at first. Because when you're alone, there's nowhere to hide. Your distractions fade, your masks fall off, and suddenly you're left with Vasautik. Here's where the magic begins. When you stop running from solitude, you begin to step into self-discovery. You begin to ask the questions that matter. You begin to face the wounds you've ignored. You begin to separate your real identity from the version of you the world created. And that is where healing starts. Learning to be alone isn't about cutting people off or isolating yourself. It's about no longer depending on others to feel alive. It's about creating a connection with the one person who's going to be with you for the rest of your life, you. So if you've been taught to fear being alone, I'm here to tell you that fear is not yours. It was given to you. And now it's time to unlearn it. Because the most dangerous person in the world is not the one with power or beauty or charm. It's the one who knows how to be alone and still thrive. Loneliness and solitude are not the same. Too often, people confuse loneliness with solitude, but the two couldn't be more different. Loneliness is a feeling of emptiness. It's what you feel when you are disconnected from others, from purpose, and most painfully, from yourself. It's a craving, a longing, a deep ache for someone or something to distract you from your own silence. But solitude is not an emptiness. It's a fullness. It's the space where you finally return to your center. It's the moment when the noise of the world fades and your inner voice becomes clear. Here's what most people never learn. You can be surrounded by people and still feel painfully lonely. You can be in a room full of laughter and still feel invisible. You can have thousands of followers, friends, or fans and still feel unknown. Why? Because you haven't built a connection with yourself. Solitude is that connection. It is intentional. It is sacred. It's the choice to sit in your own presence and feel whole, not hollow. When you begin learning how to be alone, at first it may feel uncomfortable. You feel restless. You reach for your phone. You think about who to text, what to scroll, or how to distract yourself. But stay with yourself, because after the initial discomfort comes something powerful. If you begin to realize that your worth doesn't rise and fall based on how many people are around you. You stop needing constant conversation to feel seen. You stop fearing silence, because now silence becomes a teacher. Solitude teaches you what you like, what you value, what you believe, without anyone else's voice in the mix. It helps you reclaim your mind. It helps you learn to listen, not just to others, but to your intuition, your body, your soul. And when you find peace in solitude, you become dangerous in the best way. Because no one can manipulate a person who isn't afraid to be alone. No one can control someone who doesn't rely on others for emotional survival. Solitude empowers you to raise your standards. You don't accept crumbs when you know how to feed your own spirit. You don't chase love when you've already found it within. This is why so many people are afraid of solitude, because it reveals the truth. It shows you what you've been avoiding. It shows you what needs healing, but it also shows you your power. So don't confuse your moments of aloneness with being unloved. Solitude is not a punishment. It's a pathway. The more you embrace it, the more you begin to feel not lonely, but free, not isolated, but aware, not rejected, but whole. Because once you learn to love your own presence, you'll never again settle for anyone or anything that makes you feel less than complete. You find out who you really are in silence. When you finally allow yourself to sit in silence without distractions, without validation, without someone else to mirror your identity, something powerful begins to happen. You meet yourself. And for most people, that moment is terrifying. Because in silence, there's no one to impress, no one to rescue you, no performance, no masks, no likes, no filters, just you and the truth. Silence has a way of stripping away the noise you've used to avoid the parts of you that need the most attention. It shines a light on the unhealed wounds, the beliefs you've borrowed, the fears you've internalized, and the dreams you've buried under responsibilities. It's uncomfortable because most of us have spent years avoiding this moment. We've drowned our inner voice in conversations, in television, in scrolling, in relationships, in busyness. We've stayed surrounded so we wouldn't have to confront how lost we've really felt inside. But when you give yourself the gift of solitude, when you embrace the silence, you begin to reclaim your soul. You start asking questions you haven't dared to ask. Am I living the life I truly want? Do I even know what I want? Have I been making choices from fear or from truth? And maybe for the first time, you begin to hear the answers. Not the answers someone else gave you. Not the answers your parents expected or your culture demanded. But your own, raw, honest, unfiltered. That's when the healing begins. Because you can't change what you refuse to face. And you can't find yourself if you never leave the noise long enough to hear your own voice. In solitude, you begin to see the difference between what you've chosen and what you've been conditioned into. You start to separate your identity from your roles. You're not just someone's partner, someone's child, someone's employee. You are you. And you start remembering what lights you up, what calms your nervous system, what excites your spirit, what you're willing to walk away from, and what's truly worth staying for. This clarity, it doesn't come in chaos. It comes in quiet. It doesn't show up when you're surrounded by pressure. It shows up when you give yourself permission to pause. That's why solitude isn't just helpful, it's essential. It gives you space to evaluate your life, your values, your direction. It gives you the strength to stop pretending and start becoming. And once you taste that kind of clarity, you'll never want to go back to the noise. Because nothing is louder than the truth you discover in silence. And once you've heard your own soul speak, no one else's opinion can ever drown it out again. Solitude builds strength others can't touch. There's a quiet kind of power that comes from standing alone. Not because you were forced to, not because you were abandoned, but because you chose it, because you realized that solitude was not your weakness. It was your training ground. In solitude, you learn what most people never dare to discover. That strength isn't always forged in the crowd. Sometimes it's forged in stillness. When you stop relying on others to lift you, validate you, or carry you, you awaken a level of self-respect that no relationship, no applause, no external approval could ever give you. That's when you become untouchable. You no longer fear silence. You no longer seek out people to fill the void because you realize there is no void. There's only space. And space is not emptiness, it's potential. Solitude teaches you how to lead yourself, to motivate yourself when no one's clapping, to keep going when no one's watching, to believe in your vision even when no one else understands it. Most people fall apart when they're left alone because they've built their identity on being needed, seen, or praised. But when you learn to thrive in your own presence, you become immune to the temporary validation that so many chase their entire lives. You don't break under pressure anymore because you've sat with pain and learned from it. You don't settle anymore because you know what your soul is worth. You don't chase anyone anymore because you've stopped running from yourself. That kind of strength can be faked. It can't be taught in books or borrowed from someone else. It's built in those long, quiet moments when you have to choose. Do I give up or do I grow? And every time you choose growth in solitude, you reinforce the belief that you are enough right now as you are. You begin to walk differently, think differently, because you no longer move by fear or external noise. This is the power that solitude gives you. Unshakable self-trust, grounded emotional strength, calm clarity in the chaos. You learn to say, I can do hard things, I can walk alone and still rise. I can be overlooked and still know my value. And that scares people who depend on attention to survive. But not you. Because when you build yourself in solitude, no one can tear you down. No one can take your peace because they didn't give it to you. No one can destroy your identity because you created it from the inside out. So if you're in a season where it feels like it's just you, embrace it. You're not being punished. You're being strengthened. And that strength you build now, it'll carry you for the rest of your life. Being alone teaches you how to love right. Let's talk about something most people misunderstand completely. Being alone doesn't mean you've given up on love. It means you've finally stopped settling for the kind of love that isn't real. When you've never learned how to be alone, you're more likely to fall into relationships that fill a void, not feed your soul. You confuse attention with affection. You confuse company with connection. And worst of all, you confuse being needed with being valued. But when you spend time alone, real time, you learn something most people never do. You learn how to love yourself first. You start giving yourself the things you used to beg others for. Validation, respect, affection, understanding. You stop waiting for someone else to notice your worth. And instead, you start living like you know it. And that shift, it changes everything. You no longer chase love, you attract it. You no longer lower your standards out of fear, you raise them from a place of peace. You no longer hold onto toxic people just to avoid feeling lonely. You let them go because their presence costs you your peace. This is what solitude does. It resets your heart. It untangles the emotional knots that were tied by trauma, people-pleasing, and insecurity. It gives you time to heal from the inside out. Because real love, the kind that's rooted in truth, mutual growth, and soul-level connection, can only flourish when both people come into it whole, not half. And here's what most people miss. You attract what you are, not what you want. So if you are still clinging to brokenness, you will find someone who mirrors it. If you haven't learned to enjoy your own company, you will cling to people who distract you from yourself. But when you've made peace with being alone, you don't let loneliness blind you into accepting less than you deserve. You wait, you heal, you evolve. And when love does come, because it will, you'll know the difference. You'll recognize the kind of love that complements your solitude, not competes with it. The kind that sees your independence as strength, not threat. The kind that doesn't complete you, but walks beside you in wholeness. You'll love better because you've loved yourself in the dark. You've sat with your wounds. You've confronted your shadows. You've rebuilt your heart not around someone else, but around truth. And that makes you powerful. So if you're alone right now, don't rush out of this season. Let it do its work. Let it heal you. Let it teach you. Because the love you're looking for, it begins with you. And once you've truly learned how to love yourself, you'll never again give your heart to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. The power of solitude is the beginning of self-mastery. The world tells you to stay busy, to keep moving, to stay connected, to never stop long enough to actually face your thoughts. But there's a quiet rebellion in choosing solitude. A powerful awakening that happens when you decide to sit with yourself instead of running from yourself. Because in that silence, in that stillness, you start to discover a version of you that has been waiting all along. Not the version molded by expectations, not the version shaped by pressure, but the real you. And that's where self-mastery begins. Self-mastery isn't about perfection. It's about awareness. It's about learning how to lead yourself when no one else is clapping. It's about doing what needs to be done even when no one is watching. It's about standing tall in your truth, even when the crowd disagrees. Solitude is where you sharpen that inner discipline, where you train your focus, where you learn to regulate your emotions instead of letting them control you. It's where you stop living in reaction mode and start creating your life on purpose. When you're alone, you're forced to sit with the habits, beliefs, and stories that have held you back. And in that space, you have a choice. Break down or break through. You begin to see clearly what no longer serves you, what needs to change, and who you're becoming. And more than that, you begin to reclaim your power. You stop giving it away to people who don't respect it. You stop shrinking to be accepted. You stop molding yourself just to fit someone else's comfort. Because you've done the inner work. You've cried the silent tears. You've endured the stillness that most people run from. And through it all, you grew. That growth becomes your foundation. It becomes the quiet confidence that says, I've met myself in the dark, and I'm not afraid of who I am. This is what makes you unstoppable. Not loud ambition, but quiet certainty. Not external validation, but deep inner knowing. Not force, but presence. Solitude gives you clarity. And with clarity comes direction. With direction comes purpose. And with purpose comes power. So, no, being alone is not a step backward. It's a sacred pause before your next evolution. It's the soil where your next level takes root. If you're in that season right now, honor it. Don't rush through it. Don't numb it. Don't resent it. Because the most extraordinary things grow in silence. And the person you are becoming in this quiet season, they are going to shock the world. And not because you shouted the loudest, but because you rose in stillness and came back unshaken, unbothered, and unbreakable. So now you know, being alone is not a weakness. It's a superpower. It's in the stillness, the silence, the solitude, where the strongest, wisest, most grounded version of you is born. Not in the applause, not in the noise, not in the presence of others, but in the sacred space where you finally get to meet yourself without interruption. You've been taught for years that being alone is something to fear. But what if it's actually something to honor? What if the quiet season you're in right now is exactly what your soul asks for? What if the very things you're running from are the things that will set you free? When you learn to be alone, you learn to be present. You stop chasing empty validation. You stop clinging to what isn't meant for you. You stop watering dead plants just to feel less abandoned. Instead, you start tending to your own garden. You begin feeding your mind, nurturing your spirit, protecting your peace. You stop letting the world define your worth, and you begin defining it yourself. That's the power of solitude. It gives you space to reset, to realign, to rebuild. And the more time you spend with yourself, the more you start to see how incredible you really are. You realize you don't need noise to feel alive. You don't need company to feel complete. You don't need to be chosen by others when you've already chosen yourself. You become your own anchor, your own peace, your own best friend. And when love comes, and it won't be to fill a void. It'll be an addition to an already full and beautiful life. A reflection of your wholeness, not a rescue from your emptiness. So if you're alone right now, don't rush out of it. Sit in it. Breathe through it. Grow within it. This season is not a punishment. It's a preparation. You're being refined, strengthened, transformed. And when you rise from this, you won't just be stronger. You'll be wiser. You'll be clearer. You'll be whole. So keep walking this path. Keep embracing the silence. Keep choosing yourself. Because every step you take in solitude is a step toward your freedom. And remember, you were never truly alone. You were just finally being reintroduced to the most important person in your life. Now go forward, not in fear, but in power. Not in doubt, but in trust. Not in loneliness, but in liberation. Because once you learn to be alone, no one can ever again convince you that you need to be anything less than everything you already are. And that, right there, is what makes you unstoppable.